Wonderful.
Thanks. Thank you.
Let's hear it for Michelle. Let's hear it again.
This in my boots and skirt. Thanks.
So I have a couple questions in the Slido, but I wanted to remind y'all that if you go on slido.com and put in the code, which I think was D456, you can ask some questions. But yeah, just as an aside, when I was asked to facilitate this Q&A, I was like, oh yeah, that sounds fun, whatever. And I'm like listening to you and I'm like, just like nodding my head like, I can't wait. Just like start employing some of this stuff.
Great.
But so one question someone had that I also thought of while you were talking was like when you're on the floor and you can't leave, because often you can't leave, and it's amazing when you can, but what would be like a healthy alternative for bottling up those emotions? Like what are some strategies for switching?
So you don't have to leave the floor to switch your emotion, right? You can, while you're doing your work, you can think of more positive things. You can try to get that negativity, that negative memory out of your brain, but you can also take those deep breaths while you're working. You know, you don't have to make a major ordeal out of it and communicate to that person, which would be tempting. Taking really deep breaths over here, but I still think it's useful that you can, even on the floor, take those deep breaths, and then also other people on the floor can support you. Pick up a little labor for the next 10 or 20 minutes that you wouldn't normally pick up. Let that person kind of have a physical break, even if they don't leave.
Cool. What, in terms of within the hiring process, what kinds of, like I know everybody's hiring process is probably a little bit different, but it typically involves an interview, right? A conversation. So what kind of questions did you think like would be effective in trying to seek out that emotional intelligence?
There are organizations that will create all kinds of crafty little questions to get to those answers that you want to have, and so I would encourage you to look for some of those places that have those suggestions. But I think behavioral questions. So, for instance, tell me about a conflict that you've been in a previous job, and how did you handle it? Let's just pretend, hypothetically, this particular event happens. How would you handle that? Those kinds of things ask people to apply what their behavior is going to be to a certain situation, and I think you can learn a lot from those behavioral questions. But there are also those psychologically tricky questions that you can use, and I'm not terribly familiar with them, but I do work with somebody for our advisory board who does a lot of interviewing, and there are lots of psychological questions you can ask that kind of get to people's emotional intelligence. So I would encourage you to seek out some of those and decide which ones you want to use.
Yeah, cool. In terms of people getting burnout and feeling like this sort of like wall between them, this lack of empathy, you try not to get to that point, but often you do. Do you have any strategies for sort of managing that as an organization? Sort of once that burden is already being felt, can we come back?
You can, but I think it can be hard. Yeah. It doesn't just happen in the service industry. I'm in education, and there's just a lot of pressure now, this notion that students are consumers and they all need to be happy. And so we deal with that stuff too, and some days it's just, I just kind of walk in, I do my job, and I leave, in spite of the fact I love my students and I love the colleagues in my department. I think you can, but I think it takes work. I think it sort of sounds trite, but I mean, recognize the problem is the first step. And I think sometimes we get up, we go to work, we get up, we go to work, we get up and go to, and we just kind of exist instead of being thoughtful about how we're feeling when we go to work, how we feel when we're there, how we feel when we get back. And if we maybe think through some of that stuff and ask yourself some serious questions about your career identity, is this where you really want to be? And then trying to break through that screen that we put up, which is easier said than done, I know. But we put that screen up to protect ourselves from, sort of the gnawing at our humanity that emotional labor can cause. If you can try to take that screen down in places where you're safe, with your coworkers hopefully, with your managers hopefully, maybe that can help.
Yeah. I know in cafe settings there can be assumptions made and miscommunications between baristas and customers, but one thing that I think a lot of transgender baristas or gender non-conforming baristas face is misgendering constantly. And I guess, would there be anything, like, are there specific strategies for specific sort of situations that you could speak to, or?
I think two things. I think, first of all, the reason for that misgendering is important. Is it someone who's doing it on purpose? Is it someone who's not? If it's someone who's doing it on purpose, you just gotta, I mean, to the best of your ability, you're not gonna change that person in that interaction. You're not gonna change those biases.
Like that level of purposeful conflict.
Right,
just,
right. Where somebody thinks, you know, well, I'm not really sure about you, and they make a comment to try to dig at you. But sometimes, honestly, and I teach gender and communication, we do a whole section, this gender identity stuff, like, it's pretty new. So most people grow up thinking there's two sexes. There's actually about 5. And so even as someone who teaches gender and communication, I'm constantly having to read, I'm constantly having to learn. This stuff is changing really fast, and it's great that it's changing, that we're realizing that we don't have just masculinity, just femininity, and one's connected to males, one's connected to females, that we have a continuum that can go anywhere any of us want to. But understand too that the vast majority of the public, they don't get that. They're not getting information about it, they're not reading about it. And so maybe that's a place where you can try to feel a little empathy. They just don't get it yet, they don't know yet, and it's not a personal thing, it's just a true ignorance thing. They're just not sure, they don't understand, and maybe they're doing the best they can, they just didn't do a great job. So I think it depends on what you decide the impetus of those comments might be.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of our, or in a lot of trainings that I've learned about or gone through, there's a lot of talk about sort of, I mean, there's managing your own emotions, which we don't talk about a lot, which I'm glad we're talking about it, but there's a lot of like managing customers' emotions. So that would, is that on us as baristas to, I mean, it is, right? Because of that power imbalance that you're talking about, but yeah.
It is to the extent that you want them to come back.
Right.
So you do have to try to manage, but it's really not that you're managing their emotion, you're managing your reaction to their emotion. So maybe you're that one bright spot in the day that they needed, you know, they came in really cranky, but you turn it around for them. That's certainly possible, and that's a good thing. Yeah. But I don't think you can control anybody's emotions. You can only control how you react to those emotions. And how you react to those emotions has an impact on you. So those are individual contextual decisions.
Sure.
I would say, if you want to read a good book about conflict management, it's a basic undergrad textbook, but I read it when I was an undergrad in that class and I use it. It's called Interpersonal Conflict, and it's by Hawker and Wilmot. You can get an old copy on Amazon for probably $4. But it's a great primer in terms of what conflict is, how to manage it, strategies, understanding it better. My students walk out of that class totally different people. And so if you want to pick up a book and read, pick up a cheap book on Amazon, Interpersonal Conflict, Hawker and Wilmot. It's an easy read, but it's super helpful.
Cool. That was actually one of the questions was, do you have any other recommendations for books, resources?
Hawker and Wilmot are really good. The emotional labor stuff is new. In fact, you got my name because some of you may have seen the Gemma Hartley article that was in Harper's Bazaar. I think it was, I can't remember the title, but We're Fed Up was part of the title, and it was a nice, beautiful hand gesture in a yellow cleaning glove. I just made this quick little comment. That article skyrocketed. It went everywhere. I had people I hadn't talked to in years. Oh my gosh, someone just passed this to me. Your name is in it. So I think it's kind of new.
Yeah.
And I think what's cool about this discussion is it's giving people a language to talk about things that we've always felt. We just haven't had words for it. And so go out there and find a book on emotional labor, find that book on conflict management. It gives you a language to talk about this stuff, and you really can't get too far unless you can effectively talk about it and name these things. And so I think Gemma's article, and she's writing a book too, which I think will be fantastic, on emotional labor, is giving us all a language to talk about it. And I just couldn't be happier to have been a part of that.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. In terms of maybe being someone somewhere in the middle, whether they're as a barista and they're having to sort of give out all this emotional labor, even a supervisor who then has another leader above them who isn't necessarily as emotionally intelligent and doesn't have the same skills, and then the person under, like, who already doesn't have power from customers and then doesn't have power from their leadership, how are there any specific ways to navigate that, or maybe to broach the subject with leadership within the company?
I think it depends.
Yeah.
My students hate that answer. It depends. It's contextual.
Yeah.
It depends who that owner is. It depends on the openness of that supervisor.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think if you go to people, and again, that conflict management book is one of those things that can teach you how to do that. If you go towards people with the goal of making their lives easier, making their jobs easier, providing a solution for a problem that impacts their organization in serious ways, I would hope that they would be open to that.
Yeah.
Again, it depends on personality, it depends on people.
Sure.
But I just go back to the only person you can control is you. And so you have to make sure that, number one, you're controlling your reaction to emotional labor and taking care of yourself. You can't change anybody else.
Yeah, cool. We have a couple minutes left. Are there any questions out here? Yeah, I think Todd's coming with a mic for you.
Hey, Todd.
Hi. So my question is, if you're in a leadership position and you have to manage somebody who maybe you've had conflict with outside of work, or is just a negative person, or maybe is really annoying to you, but you can't show them that, because you're their boss, what strategies do you have to kind of deal with that and not get burnt out on that?
I have this list of people going through my brain right now.
Me too.
As we all do. It's the same stupid answer. You can only control yourself. And so I think one of the things that happens to us is we can sometimes become intractable, and I'm not suggesting that you're doing that, but we come to define people as, this is just somebody I'm not going to get along with. Well, they're definitely never going to get along with somebody that you feel that way about. So it is painful as a leader to reach out and try to be kind and try to bring out kindness in people that you just really don't want to. But I think that's what great leaders do. And again, you can't control their response to that reaching out. But anything you can do to make your life easier, do it. And so maybe reaching out to that person. And if you have someone above you and you feel like this person's really negatively impacting the whole floor, the whole organization, maybe that person should go.
Yeah.
And I don't know how easy for that to happen in your industry is. In my industry with tenure, it's very difficult. So I have to do a lot more of the playing and trying to figure out ways to work with people. But maybe that person needs to go. And I think that really comes back to the idea that owners and managers have to decide, what's the organizational culture going to be here?
Yeah.
And we have good examples of organizational cultures. I think you've heard of them that are pretty strong. Ben & Jerry's, people that provide healthcare and daycare centers and things like that. I mean, these people have made decisions that their organizational cultures are going to be a certain way, and their productivity is much higher as a result. So that's not a great answer. I'm sorry. You can't change anybody else. That's the really unfortunate thing about all of this.
Anything else from, Ezra?
Hey, as women and people of color have a weird relationship with service.
That's true.
You're right.
What, especially in for instance, a city like New York City, where social status and class or rich people, you see all types all day long. What can management or ownership even do to minimize the amount of emotional labor that those people face in that regards?
I don't think they can do anything save barring those people from coming in. right? Which again is something you can't do. But
We got some claps for that.
this list, you're not allowed.
Yeah.
But again, it's about helping your employees find ways for you to be able to deal with that. I mentioned to Heather when we were talking that I wasn't really sure I wanted to mention it or not, but we have a really, really negative relationship to people in the service industry. And you probably all feel that. I've been in those positions too, and I get that. When I was going through research on this stuff, I found that people rank folks in service industries lower than people who are not. So if you have a truck driver and you have a taxi driver, that truck driver is going to be ranked as higher status because the taxi driver serves someone. God forbid. It's a horrible attitude, and that's why I was struggling with whether or not to say anything, but I decided that if it came up, I would, because you can understand it comes from a place. It doesn't have anything to do with you. And what a shame it is that the people that we rely on every day to make our lives better, to give us that cup of coffee that lets us get through the day and get started, we don't appreciate that more. But that's the reality. You're definitely seeing that reality. But again, you can't make people change those positions. You can only change how you respond. So that's what management can do, I guess I'd say, is help you with strategies for responding. I think it's a great idea to call people in 2 hours early on some day, and why don't we talk about power and conflict and just give you some skills and some knowledge to help you deal with that stuff a little bit better. Because again, just like with public speaking, nobody ever tells us how to do it. We're just supposed to do it. And that doesn't work very well. And we end up having negative feelings because we feel like we didn't do it well. So that education, I think, is really, really important. I'll come to New York City any day of the week and talk to y'all. Happy to.
Cool. That sounds great. I think we have time for one more. Mark, you're pointing to someone else who had their hand up.
Somebody else have a question?
Oh, does anybody else? Okay.
As a manager of a team, there are times where we have staff members who are very good about not showing a moment of emotional labor, and they're going through something and they kind of tough it out because that's just part of how they are.
Good job.
Is there a way for us to better recognize that they're going through a situation and alleviating them in a way, even though they're bottling it up and it's not causing any issue? It's just not good for them to be doing that. So is there a conversation that we can have, or how do we set up that dialogue where, it's okay to be in a vulnerable place and you don't have to tough it out, and we want to take care of you,
Yeah, I think everybody should want to work for you. That you're absolutely spot on in how important that can be, and that is that setting that stage, setting that social environment, so that maybe when you hire and you've already hired a person, you take them back and say, look, my expectation is that you do this part of this job, but also I care about you, and I'm worried that you have this big wall up, and I want to let you know that just because I'm your supervisor, your manager, I get it. It's hard. I get that this happens. Come talk to me anytime you want. You can't say it out there, but we can go back in the back and we can talk it out and let them know that vulnerability is okay. And in terms of gender, men have a much harder time being willing to be vulnerable. And so you may have even more issues with male employees who feel like vulnerability and masculinity aren't things that should go hand in hand. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Okay.
Totally. Thank you.
Well, I think...
There was one more.
Oh, there's one more.
No? Okay.
Oh, just kidding. Okay. Well, I think that wraps us up. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you all. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks. We'll leave these.
All right.
We'll talk.